one asteroid, one supervolcano, one officer refusing to push a red button. These are the moments when the entire human species, or a significant fraction of it, came within hours, minutes, or seconds of ending. Most people will live and die without ever realizing how thin the margin actually was. Counting down the 10 closest calls humanity has had with extinction or near extinction. Number 10. The 2008 global financial collapse. In September and October 2008, the global financial system came within hours of total seizure. After the collapse of Lehman Brothers on the 15th of September, interbank lending froze worldwide. If overnight funding markets had remained frozen another 48 to 72 hours, payroll systems, ATM networks, and basic commercial credit would have ceased functioning across the developed world. This entry does not threaten biological extinction, but the disruption of global food, fuel, and medicine supply chains driven by a complete financial freeze would have produced mass casualties within weeks. The emergency intervention by the United States Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and the Bank of England injected trillions of dollars in liquidity to keep the plumbing running. 3 days later or 3 days slower, and the second half of 2008 would have been a very different historical event. Number 9. The 1918 influenza pandemic. Between 1918 and 1920, an unusually virulent strain of H1N1, influenza killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide, though credible scholarly estimates range as high as 100 million. At the time, that represented between 2 and 5% of the global population. What made the 1918 flu uniquely dangerous was that it killed disproportionately among healthy young adults aged 20 to 40. The demographic that sustains essential labor, military forces, and reproductive populations. In a more severe variant, or with a slightly different mutation pattern, the death toll could plausibly have reached several hundred million. Reconstructive analysis of the 1918 H1N1 genome completed at the United States Centers for Disease Control in 2005 showed that the strain bore concerning similarities to certain modern avian influenza variants. Public health agencies used the 1918 pandemic as the baseline reference scenario for what a severe novel respiratory pathogen could do to humanity in the modern era. Number 8. Stanislav Petrov and the Soviet false alarm of 1983. On the night of the 26th of September 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer at the Serpukhov 15 missile early warning command center outside Moscow. At 20 minutes past midnight local time, his console showed that the United States had launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles toward the Soviet Union. Standard protocol required Petrov to report the launch immediately up the chain of command. A confirmed launch would have triggered a Soviet retaliatory strike, very likely escalating to full-scale nuclear exchange. Petrov did not report it. His reasoning was practical. A real American first strike would consist of hundreds of missiles, not 5. He suspected an equipment malfunction. Investigation later confirmed his judgment. The satellite system had misinterpreted sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds as missile launches. Petrov's refusal to push the panic button is widely credited as one of the moments that prevented global nuclear war. He was officially reprimanded for procedural failures at the time, then quietly retired. He died in 2017. The world only learned his name decades after the incident. Number 7. Vasily Arkhipov and the B-59 submarine. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, on the 27th of October 1962, the Soviet submarine B-59 was tracked and surrounded by United States Navy destroyers near Cuba. The American ships dropped non-lethal practice depth charges intended to force the submarine to surface. Inside the B-59, the crew had been submerged for days. Temperatures had risen above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was nearly unbreathable. They had lost radio contact with Moscow and did not know whether war had already begun. The B-59 carried a nuclear-tipped torpedo. The submarine's standing orders permitted the use of nuclear weapons under certain conditions. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, became convinced that war had started and ordered the nuclear torpedo prepared for launch. However, B-59 was unusual. It carried a second senior officer, Vasily Arkhipov, who as flotilla commander had authority over the captain's decision. 3 signatures were required to launch: Savitsky, the political officer, Maslenikov, and Arkhipov. Arkhipov refused. After a prolonged argument, he convinced Savitsky to surface and request orders from Moscow. The submarine surfaced, made contact, and was ordered to return to Soviet waters. One man in one submarine prevented the start of a nuclear war. Arkhipov died in 1998 without ever receiving the recognition he deserved during his lifetime. Number 6. The Norwegian rocket incident of 1995. On the 25th of January 1995, a four-stage Black Branthe 3/3 rocket was launched from the Endoya rocket range in northern Norway to study the aurora borealis. Russian early warning radar in the Arctic detected the launch and incorrectly classified the rocket's trajectory as consistent with a possible high-altitude nuclear weapon launched by a United States submarine in the Norwegian Sea. The Russian Early Warning Command notified President Boris Yeltsin's nuclear briefcase, the so-called Shajet. Yeltsin activated the briefcase and consulted with his defense minister and the Russian chief of staff. Russia came within minutes of authorizing a launch decision. Norwegian authorities had notified Russia of the rocket test weeks in advance, but the notification had been mishandled within the Russian Foreign Ministry and never reached the nuclear command structure. The rocket eventually deviated from the trajectory and fell into the sea. The crisis resolved. It was the first and only known time a head of state has activated the nuclear briefcase during a perceived attack since the systems were established. Number 5. The Carrington Event. In September 1859, a massive solar coronal mass ejection struck the Earth's magnetic field. The British astronomer Richard Carrington had observed the solar flare that produced it the day before. The geomagnetic storm produced auroras visible as far south as the Caribbean. Telegraph systems across Europe and North America failed. Some telegraph operators received electric shocks from their equipment. Telegraph paper caught fire. In 1859, this caused property damage but no mass casualties. A modern Carrington-class event would be a different matter. Power grid transformers, satellites, GPS, internet routing infrastructure, financial transaction systems, water and gas pumping stations, all are vulnerable to severe geomagnetic-induced currents. Major reinsurance studies have estimated that a modern Carrington-class event could disable the North American power grid for months to years, with cascading effects including refrigeration loss, water supply failure, and breakdown of medical supply chains. A near miss occurred in July 2012, when a coronal mass ejection of comparable magnitude crossed Earth's orbital path, but missed the planet by approximately 9 days. Scientists studying the data later estimated the probability of a Carrington-class event hitting Earth in any given decade at roughly 12%. Number 4. The Tunguska Event. On the morning of the 30th of June 1908, an enormous explosion occurred in the remote eastern Siberian taiga, near the stony Tunguska River. The blast flattened an estimated 80 million trees across 2,000 square kilometers. The shockwave was registered by seismic stations as far away as the United Kingdom. The cause is now understood to have been the airburst of an asteroid or comet fragment approximately 50 to 60 meters in diameter. The energy released was estimated at between 3 and 30 megatons of TNT, roughly equivalent to 1,000 Hiroshima bombs at the high end of estimates. Because the Tunguska region was almost entirely uninhabited, the death toll appears to have been limited to a handful of people. If the same object had entered the atmosphere just 4 hours later, the Earth's rotation would have placed Central Europe directly under it. A Tunguska-class airburst over a city like London, Paris, or New York would kill millions in seconds. Astronomers estimate that Tunguska-class impactors strike Earth roughly once every 200 to 300 years. We are statistically overdue. Number 3. The Toba supereruption. Approximately 74,000 years ago, the Toba volcano on the island of Sumatra erupted with a force estimated at 2,800 cubic kilometers of dense rock equivalent. It was the largest known volcanic eruption in the past 2 million years, and one of the largest in Earth's geological history. The eruption produced a massive ash cloud that circled the globe and reduced solar radiation, reaching the surface for years. Some climate models suggest the eruption caused a multi-decade volcanic winter, with global temperatures dropping by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius in tropical regions. Genetic studies of modern human populations show evidence of a severe genetic bottleneck approximately 70,000 years ago, consistent with the human breeding population dropping to as few as 1 to 10,000 individuals across the entire species. Some researchers contest the direct link between Toba and the bottleneck, but the convergence of geological and genetic evidence is striking. If the human breeding population had dipped a few thousand individuals lower, modern humans might have followed Neanderthals into extinction. Every human being alive today is descended from the survivors of that bottleneck. Number 2. The Cuban Missile Crisis as a whole. From the 16th of October to the 28th of October 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a 13-day standoff over the deployment of Soviet medium-range nuclear missiles to Cuba. Multiple historians, declassified documents, and post-crisis interviews with participants from both sides have established that the world came closer to full-scale nuclear war during those 13 days than at any other time in human history. The Arkhipov submarine incident from earlier in this countdown happened during these same 13 days. A separate incident saw a United States U-2 reconnaissance aircraft accidentally stray into Soviet airspace over the Arctic at the height of the crisis. Another saw the unauthorized launch of a Soviet surface-to-air missile that shot down a U-2 over Cuba, killing the pilot. Each of these incidents could have been the spark. President John F. Kennedy himself later told biographers he estimated the odds of nuclear war during the crisis at between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2. The de-escalation, achieved through the back-channel negotiations of Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, including the secret withdrawal of United States missiles from Turkey, is widely considered one of the most consequential diplomatic achievements of the 20th century, and the #1 closest call with extinction. The Chicxulub impact. Approximately 66 million years ago, an asteroid roughly 10 kilometers across struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico at a speed of about 20 kilometers per second econd. The impact released energy estimated at 100 million megatons of TNT, roughly 10 billion times the yield of the Hiroshima bomb. Within minutes, ejecta material rained back through the atmosphere, igniting global wildfires. Soot and sulfur aerosols darkened the sky for years. Photosynthesis nearly collapsed. Approximately 75% of all multicellular species on Earth went extinct. Among them, every non-avian dinosaur lineage, the pterosaurs. Most marine reptile groups, roughly half of all marine invertebrate species. The small mammalian survivors, the size of shrews, eventually diversified into every modern mammal lineage, including the primates that produced humans. You are listening to this because Chicxulub happened. If the asteroid had missed, an astronomical reconstruction suggests it was a relatively low probability orbital encounter. The dinosaurs would likely still dominate the planet, and our lineage would never have had room to evolve. Now, the modern parallel. In 2029, an asteroid named Apophis, approximately 340 meters in diameter, will pass within 32,000 kilometers of Earth. That is closer than the orbit of geostationary satellites. Apophis is roughly 30 times smaller than the Chicxulub impactor. It would not cause a mass extinction, but it would produce regional devastation, mass casualties, and global climate disruption if it struck. Current orbital tracking gives Apophis a near-zero probability of impact in 2029. But the gravitational interaction with Earth during the flyby will subtly alter its orbit. Future passes through 2068 and beyond remain under active astronomical surveillance. The Chicxulub impact was a roll of the cosmic dice that ended one branch of life and made room for another. The dice are still being rolled. We just have telescopes now. 10 close calls. 10 reminders that the continuation of the human species is not a guarantee, but an ongoing series of narrow escapes. Some of these calls came from the cosmos. Some came from our own hands. Survival has always been the exception, not the rule.